Yeah. Hi, Kylie. I'm not sure if we have anything nutrition based today, but guys, oh yeah,
tangentially.
Yeah, that might be good for Kylie to chime in on. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, per usual, we're gonna do kind of a mixed match
rapid fire
of questions. We'll
try
to be
all
quick.
Over the spectrum.
Yeah.
Answering them as quickly as possible and failing spectacularly.
Yeah.
The first one, I'll ask TJ because he's kind of the mastermind behind this, but can you explain the 4-point check-in? The 4-point check-in on, especially the part on physical fatigue. How do you define physical fatigue? I'm tired at the moment, but it's not exactly what I would call physical fatigue.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
I love this question because I think that there's always a little bit of, not everybody kind of intuitively reads into that check-in in the same way that I do. So to provide some extra context there, and thanks for providing the question. You know who you are, you're on the call, but this is really good for the community. So the whole point of the 4-point check-in is to give a scale to the things that you feel and the kind of categories of maybe fatigue and the categories that are most relevant to how you're going to feel training wise. So we have sleep, we have mental and emotional fatigue, we have overall fatigue, and we have physical, like our physical feelings. All of these things work together to kind of give you an overall sense of well-being when you're out there. So this kind of originated as like a wellness check-in. It actually originally had 6 categories and we reduced it to the 4.
Happy medium.
Yeah, just a little less data because we don't want you guys to be so obsessed, and also for us, get right to the point. What are the things that matter? The other kind of reason why we do this check-in is because it's not always easy for everybody to articulate via the work-life notes column in your training log about how you're feeling in these areas. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by one thing and forget to mention the other. Sometimes some people just aren't great at talking about how they feel. So a lot of people are better at using a scale to kind of explain these things. And the scale also helps the coach look and track at any patterns that are developing and kind of like, especially on like that 3-day to week long area. If we're looking at things that are on the 4-point check-in that are lasting for, many, many weeks and months, that at that point, often we're prompting athletes to check in with their doctor or to go see a PT if it's something on the physical side. Because, basically if a pattern is existing more than 3 days in a row, we've got something pretty substantial.
If you're tired, if you like hit a 1 or a 2 once during a week, it's like, that's being a person, like it's hard, you get tired. If you're hovering around 1 or 2 consistently or regularly, or if there's like a pattern that emerges, that's where we start to get concerned and want to take like intervention. Have an intervention action.
Absolutely. So just to explain the scale, 1 to 5, 3 for us is a balanced state. That's kind of your default. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling normal. In terms of like sleep, what does that look like? Well, maybe I'm sleeping between 7 and 8 hours a night. I wake up, I feel pretty good every day. Okay, so in my training log, I'm going to put a 3. But if I have a night that I sleep poorly, for me, last night, I only slept like 5 hours. So in my training log today, I'm going to put a 2 or a 1 based on how I feel.
I think I got 8.5.
So jealous. And like, that is really important because if you're sleeping and you're putting down a 1 or a 2 several days in a row, it can indicate to the coach that we need to reduce your workouts because you're not getting proper recovery. And as you know, we're huge advocates for sleep. Sleep is our biggest recovery tool. It controls all of our everything from, our hormonal balance to our muscle recovery. Just for clarity, mental state, it is super, super important. So that's probably the most important part of that check-in. again, if you're sleeping like a total boss, which we're always trying to do, right? You might be, normally like that 7 or 8 hour sleeper, and you're hitting like 9 hours or 10 hours, especially during like a big part of your training period where you need that extra sleep. Maybe you're going to put a 4 or 5. 5 would be like complete abundance. You are feeling amazing about your sleep. You're getting every hour that you need. Again, 3 would be in the middle. That'd be like what you're hoping to get all the time, 7 or 8 hours, something like that. And 1 or 2 would be like you're not sleeping nearly enough. You feel very affected by it, and it's affecting your training. I think something that a lot of people kind of mistake is like, what's physical? What does the physical part of the check-in mean versus the fatigue part of the check-in?
Like mental, emotional.
Well, there is a mental and emotional category. So
Right.
I think it's important to differentiate between the 3. So physical feelings are going to be soreness, stiffness, like ability to like, your mobility.
Your heart rate does not match perceived effort.
Right, exactly. Things like that. Very physical. When we talk about fatigue in general, it's like, how are you feeling? So if I slept for 2 hours, I might, be feeling really fatigued. So I'm going to put maybe a 2 for my fatigue state. But, if I slept for 10 hours, I'm feeling extra good, or I just came off of a week of a down week and I'm feeling like really ready to go. Maybe my fatigue is moving from like a 3 or a 2 where it was at the height of my training, then a rest week, boom, then I'm up at a 4 or a 5.
I think another thing that's really important is like understanding what our relationship to fatigue and training is, because when you're training, you're going to experience, like, particularly during peak weeks, particularly if we're working on something like super compensation, long runs, like there are going to be times when you're going to experience fatigue, and that's good and productive and intentional in the training process. However, you should not feel that way most of the time, because good training, which I would define as training that intentionally improves your running economy, can really only happen when you don't feel fatigued, when you feel good, when you feel refreshed, when you're able to move your legs in the way that you want to. Because if you're significantly fatigued a lot of the time, and then you practice running in a fatigued state, you're basically just going to get really good at running while fatigued, which is like not a great way to, BQ or like, run Western states or whatever.
Or develop the neuro pathways that you need to have better biomechanics.
Because like I always think of running as like practice, right? Like kind of like if you were practicing the piano, you're like refining neuro pathways in your brain. You're basically just teaching your muscles what to do. And if you're teaching them to slog, you're going to get good at slogging. And that's not what we want to do.
I agree. So fatigue is kind of your overall tiredness. And then we have mental and emotional, which is kind of the mental side of things. How are you feeling? How is your mental bandwidth? Are you feeling pretty good? Are you feeling, I don't know, for me, I think about this in terms of like, am I really being patient? Am I able to move through challenges in the day relatively well? Or are little things starting to like get at me? Those are my cues that mentally I'm starting to feel fatigued. And all of these categories can affect each other. So, fatigue in general, like general tiredness, physical sensations, soreness, stiffness, things like that. Mental, you guys know it's kind of what's going on upstairs in your mind. How patient are you? Are you,
I think just
feeling drawn out.
Another important thing to point out is that people who really know what they're doing and who study this kind of thing look to like, when you look at like how people like there's actually a specific study that looks at the psychological state, the mental emotional state of elite gymnasts, and uses that as a proxy precursor for injury. And there is a really strong correlation between mental and emotional. Like if you're hovering in that 1-2, a lot of times that can be a precursor to like maybe this person is heading towards overtraining or injury. So like if you're feeling really mentally and emotionally like drawn out or like kind of like, in a vice, frequently that can be like, that's real, right? Just because it's in your head doesn't make it not real. And we need to pay attention to that in training, because a lot of times it can indicate that something deeper is going on that needs to be addressed, and just pushing through it in training will not always be productive or healthy.
Yeah. Again, like I think we have athletes who don't use the 4-point check-in. I would strongly advise every athlete here to utilize that check-in, because it gives a hard number to how you feel. And it's very easy for the coach to look at the stream of numbers day after day and see where the patterns are. Because if you are checking in at a 1 or a 2 mentally and emotionally, which we saw a lot of that over 2020.
Pandemic was not great.
The pandemic was like, every day was like a 2 for, for me. And that's really tough. That means you have to reduce your training. I don't know what the exact percentage of reduction is. That depends on each athlete, but reducing in order for you to still get something out of your training and or to not push you to the point of, extreme physical limitation, an injury, something like that. We want to make sure the training is productive and matches up with how you're feeling. And it's okay to need to reduce. Sometimes these numbers and patterns allow us, the coach, to make a more informed decision. And we can kind of take some of the noise of the writing in the training log out of the equation and focus right on the numbers. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it.
Some people write a lot more like Hemingway, and for some people it's like James Joyce Ulysses in the log, like every single day. And so being able to have those numbers allows us to just make sometimes a more informed and objective decision, because some people kind of live in like, for some people their like happy medium seems to be a 4 or like seems to be a 2. Like, everyone's calibration is slightly different, and it takes time for the coach to get to know the athlete. But it's just a really helpful metric for us. And that's kind of what we think of and how we use it in terms of training. When we, in one of our previous talks, we mentioned the stress pizza, right? Like you only have so much pizza. And so if like life or work stress starts to encroach on the training side, like we're here to adjust that training. And that doesn't mean your training is going to be less good. In fact, the only thing that would make your training less productive is if you try to be like, I need to have this much training all the time. Like, well, no, like, if you're going through stuff, work is busy, like trying to like pretend that you're training in a vacuum is going to make your training less productive. So
I would agree. And another thing that you might find if you do this for long enough, little things tend to pop up, or those things that nag you the most in your training. For me, that's my feet. Those things tend to nag when mentally and emotionally I'm a little bit drawn out. I'm putting down that 2 for my check-in. That's when things start to pop up. There are definitely connections there. And I think it's important. And you guys as athletes want to begin to develop and expand your awareness around, the feedback that your body gives you, so you can make more informed decisions about your training. And also so you can more clearly kind of articulate to your coach what's happening, so they can give you, better guidance, seeing where you fall on that scale, and then maybe cueing in and linking that to some of the physical sensations that you might be having can be really important.
Yeah. All right. Question number 2. When is it okay to do a running streak?
Never.
So,
I love this question.
Never, so with an asterisk, maybe.
Okay.
So
explain.
I don't feel that for most athletes it is healthy or productive to do a run streak.
Why the asterisks?
So, you have a coach for a reason, and that's to help you find the correct amount of mileage for you, and to also help you hold accountable to resting. Something that we don't love about run streaks is that they tend to diminish the importance of resting, and they tend to overemphasize the importance of running. So we talk about consistency a lot. Like you might think, wow, why don't these guys like run streaks? That's a great way to stay consistent. For me, one of the most important parts of consistency is really, really honoring that rest day, because resting like a boss enables you to train like a boss. I think that that's like just a really important thing to take into account. Like if you don't treat your rest days as seriously as you treat your workout, then it's going to be very hard for you to stay consistent and to nail those amazing workouts. And once again, you hired a coach so that you have someone who can kind of objectively and impartially balance the stress load of your training and life and do that in an informed way that makes sense for you. A run streak doesn't care about you or know about your life. And I think it's one of those really important times to really examine the why behind what you're doing. If you're doing a run streak because you want to get a sticker on your Strava profile or like post something on Instagram, it's like, well, you know, when you have like Instagram versus like risk for injury, like to me, it's like, yeah, you know, I'm always going to prioritize like health and longevity over like sick Instagram posts or like a Strava sticker. I can't really think of, and you know, I've done a running streak before and it had the positive impact of helping me kind of explore what my mileage potential might be. But then I had to rest for like several days afterwards. And it ended up basically balancing out because I had to, like, I did one very high volume week, and then I had to do one significantly lower than average volume week to balance it out. So in the end, it's basically like I did 2 average weeks, one with significant risk for injury, which is not incredible for training.
Yeah.
I would love to know what your thoughts on this are.
I'm all about taking extra rest days. Yeah. I'm going to use this as my
rest streak.
Yeah, as my kind
nap
of
streak.
Way to plug that rest streak. Yeah, I think in my personal experience, actually having done a few run streaks early on in my running career.
Actually, when we first met, you were doing a running streak, and that was when your plantar fasciitis developed.
Exactly.
And I was like, this is like when we first were getting to know each other. And because he was doing a run streak, I was like, maybe we can't be friends.
What?
Yeah, I was like, that's not healthy, man. I need a guy that rests.
I'm the rester in this relationship.
But it was that one time, the one time you weren't a rester, right? Like that one, it was like 1 month out of your whole life that you like, you know, ran 3 miles on your rest day and developed plantar fasciitis.
I remember winning that race.
Okay, right. There were pros and cons.
Which is the worst feedback you could ever get when you're doing something that's not correct.
But now you've had plantar fasciitis for like 2 years.
Well, yeah, it's great.
Worth it.
No, I mean, yeah, I think, gosh, you can definitely say that caused the problem that was underlying.
Yeah.
And that was poor decision making. And I wish that I had been a little more transparent with my coach about the fact that I was running. I ran like 14 days in a row or something, very high volume in the mountains, pushing for a race goal. And yeah, it wasn't worth it. And I would say to any of you guys who have done that or are thinking about it, like, yeah, take that extra rest day, because that is our insurance against things like that happening. You know, as a result, I have to take care of my feet every single day now. And, you know, that's the reality. And if I run a little too much, you know, sometimes my feet bother me, and it can be a limiting factor. And I would also say that, you know, the run streak, it can be fun to stack up that amount of volume, but generally,
you know what's even more fun? Not being hurt.
Exactly. Like generally, like you end up the training balance ends up being skewed in the wrong direction when you have to take more time off later.
Yeah.
And I ended up having to take like 2 weeks off that season because of that. And I had like a couple really poor results later on because of that. So like sometimes when we do these run streaks, we don't get the initial feedback of like that injury happening right away, because things are happening on a cellular level first, and we don't feel them until later, which is why we take, you know, that extra rest day as our safety net. You know, you might not need a rest day every week, but you do it anyways because it gives you the safety that you need. It helps you to recover a little bit more, because we don't know all the time what's going on at a cellular level. And then maybe, you know, like what happened with me was like my plantar didn't flare up at that next race. It didn't flare up during that run streak. It flared up really bad like 3 weeks or 4 weeks later. Well after any of these things. It was, you know, a month later. So anyways, I think, yeah, it's important to realize like the run streek,
the risks far outweigh the benefits.
But exactly, like it doesn't. And
Yeah.
I think when a lot of athletes start, you know, I've had conversations with people who are run streaking. They're married to their run streak, And
we have turned athletes down for the program because they would not take rest days.
We have, absolutely. And those are very hard conversations to have, I think, especially for me, wanting to be really inclusive in the community and with who we coach. But that one day off, I'm so firm on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think, you know, so recently I've just been thinking about this because we recently published a column in Trail Runner that was very pro run streak. And, you know, I think it's important, like, obviously, as an editor, I'm very excited on having a variety of opinions represented on my platform. And one of the reasons that our Trail Runner writer was really pushing for run streaks is he was saying it helps motivation. And I guess my pushback on that is that, like, if you need to keep going to stay motivated, that's not true motivation, right? Like, that's still some like weird external thing. You know, you should be able to motivate yourself through a rest day. Like, if like a rest day makes you feel less motivated, then like psychologically there's something going on that running cannot address.
Yeah. Oh man, let me plug the rest day as your most important training day of the week. That's why I always consider the training week starting on your rest day, not the week finishing on your rest day. And I think Drew mentioned that in here. Drew, I don't know if you want to share any of your insights.
No,
actually, the only running streak I've ever done was with Drew, like 5 years ago.
I know the run streaks. I've been guilty of indulging myself, trying to use a run streak as a motivator to get back into shape or to get back with consistency. But like Zoe said, sometimes the bad outweighs the good. That you know, you're in a short term, you're getting more consistent. You're maybe building short-term fitness, but the long-term affects the increased chance of injury. And really the strain that takes on your mind is huge. It's not just a physical exhaustion, but a mental thing too. And then if life happens, which it always does, and you end up missing out on your run streak for whatever reason, there's that feeling of guilt that comes with that. Like you're doing something wrong, that you failed. And that's just really unhealthy. So you guys are absolutely right.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I noticed there's a couple other comments here. I
love that rest days are like bringing out bringing people out.
And I like how I'm seeing that people are being more intentional with their rest days now that they've kind of been working with Microcosm. I think that's super important. I know, just to kind of comment on what you're saying, Drew, a lot of athletes who aren't training for races, and this, I think this kind of goes for anybody who's maybe listening to us on YouTube or through the podcast and isn't being actively coached by us right now. But a lot of people who are really goal motivated, external goal motivated, let's take the 100K, for example, a really long, challenging race. Maybe you're running 20 miles a week for 6 to 8 weeks. That's kind of like, I'm just hanging out. I'm doing a run every couple days, not really very consistent. I'm getting out there. And then, 12 weeks out from my event, I seriously train. And for me, that means I run 6 or 7 days a week, normally 7 days, because I know that I need to get like the volume in that 100K requires. And I've seen that kind of thinking from a lot of athletes who join Microcosm. And it's not, I don't want to say it's unhealthy, but it's a little counterproductive.
Especially for long-term.
Right, because doing like very little and very inconsistently and then upping your volume over 7 days. Yeah, we're spreading, maybe you go from 20 miles a week to, I've seen these crazy jumps, like a 20 mile a week runner jumping to 12 weeks of 50 miles a week to prepare for 100K. And that jump in itself is super risky, even if you're spreading the stress out over 7 days, but then not resting on top of that makes it much more likely that you're going to get to the start line of your 100K, probably with some niggles. Never great to run an ultra with niggles, but most likely you're going to be exhausted.
You go into an ultra with a niggle, you're going to come out with something real special.
Yeah, I mean, you really could. And so I want to continue to say, like, we use that rest day as an insurance policy. Consistent running is running that's done usually 4 or 5 days a week, depending on your age and background. And consistent running is running that takes place over many weeks and months. And it operates outside of any external goals that you have. That way you're prepared for a little more volume when you start training for the 100K. Yeah, that kind of came to mind, Drew. So I wanted to mention it. Thanks for sharing. And I really love how so many people are learning to embrace their rest.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that all athletes kind of sometimes overlook.
I feel like the biggest turning point for me in my training was resting more.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I've won 100Ks off of 5-day-a-week training, you know, like you don't have to do crazy volume, and prioritizing consistency through rest is super important. I guess, to me, just to kind of finish this run streak discussion, a run streak is a really tiny example of consistency. We're looking for big consistency, right? You know, it's better than 7 days of running, 7 years, you know, do whatever you can do to keep running for 7 years, 14 years, 23 years.
A lot of rest days.
A lot of rest days.
Not very many run streaks.
Not many run streaks.
You know, maybe your run streak is like doing a stage race or something.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we can I think, you know, there've been times where we did a running vacation one time. We ran 6 days in a row, and then we took an extra rest day. There's times where you can build it into, you know, make things work. But yeah, we never try to intentionally. We try to be intentional about our training, because if you're not being intentional, then are you training? You're just running, you know. And yeah, just do things on purpose. You don't need to prove fitness to have it. Social media is the worst reason to do literally anything. And we already think you're awesome. You don't need to prove it to us.
Oh man, we're just the chat box is blowing up right now with so many
pro rest day.
Yeah,
I love this.
This is awesome. And Matt,
I want to know
some DuckTales. That's so cool. Should we? I don't know if we should keep going down this rabbit hole. We won't have time for these other questions. But yeah, Jason, I think it's cool that you're using the concept of not pushing your hardest indefinitely in your Taekwondo kind of practice and with your students. That's huge. Kind of helping younger people develop an understanding of rest, and that we don't have to push through at our hardest level all the time. That it's important to take a step back to rest and then go back to pushing from the renewed state is super important. I think it's tough in the ethos of kind of this of society here, that we all see these examples of people who are pushing through all the time, pushing through tons of fatigue and all of these things that we've talked about. And I don't understand how they can do it. Maybe there's always outliers.
There's always going to be outliers, and there's always people who just straight up are dishonest about how they feel.
Yeah, I mean,
you know?
Totally.
It makes me think of one of my favorite Ted Lasso quotes. He's out there, he's coaching his soccer team, and he says, "All I want is a 60% effort 1,000% of the time." And that's how I think about running. 60% effort 1,000% of the time.
Yeah, being really good at showing up.
Yeah, being really good at showing up, even if it's, you don't want to give 100% effort, basically. You want to be all there, all present, everything, but 60% effort 1,000% of the time.
That would be that easy pace. Just cruising.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Next question.
Third question, TJ. Is there a magic formula for knowing what a reasonable goal would be for distance and maybe vert for future races when you are base building? For example, if I wanted to set a goal distance run for June, how do I know what might be reasonable? And by reasonable, I mean I have the fitness level to complete it.
This is a tough question, one that I wish I had seen before this moment.
Ha, gotcha.
Yeah. You want me to start?
I guess I'll buy you a few minutes of time.
Okay.
There's not very many magic algorithms for anything in running.
That was my answer.
Yeah, it totally depends on the athlete's background, goals, a lot of different things. But I think, for me, it depends on, so basically, no, there's no numeric answer, right? There's no X equals Y for this. It's you should work with your coach to determine this. like a really non-satisfying answer. But you basically want, as coaches, the way we think about it is, how do I balance like risk for injury, right? Because you don't, like, if you jump up and, like, let's say if someone is running 20 miles a week and wants to run a 100K, the dilemma then becomes, well, how do I ramp up training in a way where there's diminished risk for injury while training, but there's also not a huge potential risk for injury on race day? And I think that's where it becomes challenging.
That obviously we've both been poring over training logs, stressing about making builds like that and feeling uncomfortable about it. And it's very, very hard as a coach to sometimes meet an athlete where they're at when maybe they're not prepared for an event, and it's going to be difficult to prepare for that event because of past training history, experience, etc. My biggest thing when choosing races, and you guys have heard me say this before, is pick a race that means something to you and lights you up. That if a race means something to you, if it's in a place that you're psyched on, if it's got a elevation profile that you think is going to be challenging and that you love, you know, if it's a distance that you love, if you like to be out there all day, go long. You know, if you're someone who doesn't have that much focus or patience or isn't sure, you know, go shorter. You know, there's no mileage that like prerequisite that this is like, okay, you're a runner if you do this distance. Like, we look at these things as very individual. It's what you love. It's what kind of drives or, you know, drives you forward and what speaks to you. Ultimately, if you pick goals that have meaning to you, you're going to be more successful in your training regardless of those goals. Why are you going to be more successful? You're going to be more successful because every day when you go out to run, you're going to be fired up, you're going to be motivated, but often we need to train in the terrain that our races are in. And if you're choosing a race, generally you're going to choose that race because you like that terrain and you're going to be training in that terrain, and that's going to help you get prepared. You know, is there a number on this? Like, I tend to be pretty honest with athletes who are stretching themselves. I think this is like a really big year because a lot of people right now, let's contextualize this a little bit. A lot of people right now are racing or thinking about doing races that were postponed from 2020. So they're automatically into races in 2021 that got canceled in 2020. For a lot of people, this looks like my race got canceled in 2020. So I stopped training, or I started training very little because I wasn't very motivated to get out when I knew that that race was canceled. And then January 1st rolled around and I thought I'd hire a coach to help me move towards that race. But I haven't done much between now and then. Oh, my race is on June 1st. It's like, okay, we have, 5 months to prepare or whatever. And I've been running 20 miles a week, but I'm training for 100K. There's a dilemma there. Like, how do we get you prepared? What's reasonable? Well, if you want to ask me very honestly, what is most reasonable is that you don't do that race and you think about doing that race in the fall, so you have more time to build your base of volume up in a way that is safe. Around 10% increase in volume per week is kind of like the general rule, and you continue to move forward and build on that. If you're pushing yourself to get to X number of miles per week because a goal is kind of telling you to do that, but you haven't met the demands of that race yet via your previous training, it's very risky, and you have to have a conversation with the athlete, like the risk, and think about the risk reward factor. Are you willing to maybe to risk potential injury in the training process as we push things? So for me, it's really highly individualized. This conversation really happens between a coach and an athlete. Sometimes the answer isn't what the athlete wants to hear, but that's only because the coach has the athlete's, overall long-term health.
It's even better than running a crappy 100K this year, running an awesome one next year.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so important. I've had a lot of athletes who've been working with me for a while now, came in wanting to run that 100 first year. And we've been a year in and they're like, all right, I think that 100 is going to happen like in 2 more years. Because I'm really seeing the, like, how these, like, I'm seeing like the growth in running shorter races and working on developing my speed and economy. I'm actually improving. I'm spending less time recovering. You know, when we do a big race, we have these huge recovery periods after. For 100K or 100 miles, you're looking at like a month of recovery time, sometimes a lot more than that. So that can derail the training. It can be, you know, really challenging. And when you're really building your base, when you're really looking to improve, the uninterrupted kind of training cycles are very, very important. I hope that kind of helped whoever asked this question. I know it's probably not a very satisfying answer. But
it depends. I think it's important to know there is no magic formula. We make all of these decisions on an athlete, like a very individualized athlete basis, right? Like if there were more magic formulas in running, we would not be doing this job, right? You would just have like a chat bot that would do this for you. Thank God that doesn't exist yet. And, you know, I think it's like, for me, it's like, pick a goal where the training is not going to stress you out. And like, you feel like if your goal puts so much pressure on you that you feel like you can't miss a run and you have to hit every workout and you're going to freak out if you mess up your long run, then that goal is that's not a good goal for you.
It's too much.
It's too much.
Yeah, I would agree. And thank you, Zoe, because there is, you know, how do we know what goals are reasonable? And I think that
it should feel reasonable.
It should feel reasonable. It should not feel like a stretch. We don't want to feel like we've gotten away with things when we go out and compete in an adventure or race. We want to feel like we pushed ourselves just a little bit outside of our boundaries, because that's going to provoke healthy growth. If we're stretching and getting away with things, almost always the athlete ends up so burned out after that experience that they really struggle to return to running again.
That was actually one of the reasons we now have the please work with us for a year agreement, is because so many people would come in, use us as their couch to 100-mile program, and then peace out because they realized that in training for 100 miles, they fell out of love with running, and that just breaks my heart.
Yeah. And oh man.
If your goal makes you dislike running, it was not the correct goal. And sometimes you can only see that in retrospect. So take every precaution going into things that you don't, if you like pick a goal where you're like, I am 100% certain this won't make me hate running. That's a good goal.
I think sometimes it's like, what's reasonable? You know, I've had these discussions with my coach because I've always thought, oh man, do I want to run a 100 this year? Zoe's so into the 100s. How do I get there? And then I asked my coach and he's like, you know, don't you want to just get faster? And I'm like, oh,
we enjoy different types of running.
Right.
Like TJ's ideal, like in the summer, his ideal Saturday is sleeping in, eating granola, running for 3 hours, and then eating nachos. My ideal day is like Alpine start, hopefully home by dark. And that's like why our racing goals tend to be very different.
And I think it's important to recognize that and to sometimes have somebody else who you can bounce that idea off of. Like, I like to go fast, and maybe one day I'll get to go fast in a 100.
I like to eat peanut butter and jelly at altitude. And that's why I pick races that like doing that is good training for them.
Totally. That
doesn't make us like a better or worse athlete. It makes us different athletes.
Yeah. Drew brings up a really good point about goals being fluid.
Yes.
You know, when I first started running, I had my heart set on, you know, things like UTMB and stuff like that. And it wasn't as much about this like mastery approach to running where every day I'm doing something to get a little bit better and I'm becoming a better runner. And through the lens of becoming a better runner, I get better at competing, or, you know, I get closer to being prepared to run a 100. Your goals can change over time. And that's totally okay. And it's okay to change your goals based on what you're feeling mentally, physically, what opportunities you have around you. You know, keep that in mind. You don't have to be beholden to something that you told your coach on day one you wanted to do. That's completely not necessary, you know. And don't be married to the mileage. Some people love long races. other people are like me and they're psyched on a marathon.
Yeah,
that's totally fine.
Yeah, totally. I think, don't let your goals define who you are as a person, because they just don't, right? Like, you don't have to, if you feel the need to like have an ultra on the schedule, to think of yourself as an ultra runner, I think that's a flawed approach. You are who you are, regardless of what races you run in any given year and over the course of a lifetime. To us, you're still awesome. You're awesome if you are not even interested in ever going a marathon. Like, if you just want to like become an amazing 5K runner or an amazing 10K runner, or just like try a trail race once in your life, like those are all valid. And if at any point you find yourself needing to shore up your identity through goals, that's a problem.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that can provoke some time for introspection or talking
because
to supportive
potentially
people
something like a global pandemic will come along and rip all your goals out from under you, and then there goes like half your identity.
Yeah, we've seen that.
We've all learned and grown a lot this year.
We've dealt with that. We've dealt with that, both of us. You know, in 2020 was such a challenging year for that. All right, let's try to get one or two more of these questions.
What do you think? I'll let you just pick one and ask
Okay,
me.
how many beers is too many beers after a run? More than one beer is an appropriate answer for that question. You can become dehydrated after too many beers after a run, so be careful.
Actually, the research says if you drink any alcoholic beverage that's more than 4% alcohol, then you're starting to potentially experience the detrimental effects of dehydration because of alcohol consumption.
Not
so
even
like
one beer.
Not even a heady IPA could be too much.
Oh my God,
the
what
research
am I gonna
says.
do?
But my caveat is also that if you're asking yourself how many beers is too many beers, like that might be too many for you, right? And it totally depends on the person. And if you're at all worried or concerned about that relationship, it can be a really good time to like just, try to take a neutral examination of like what role alcohol plays in your athletic life. Like, let's say I go to regular alcohol consumption looks different for a lot of people. What we want to avoid is things like dependency or having like a chronically negative relationship with it. And that looks different for everyone. But if you're at all curious about it, then, maybe that's something to lean into and like investigate the role that alcohol plays in your athletic life.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking maybe instead of doing a run streak, you could do like a non-alcohol streak.
Yeah.
See how far you can go.
I'm actually doing that right now. And you might have noticed on the Zoom calls, I've been rocking a lot of Athletic Brewing Company beer lately because I do like beer. And I'm someone that I noticed that when I really love to cook, but I also really liked to have a beer when I cooked. And I noticed that I could just totally replace that habit with a can of LaCroix.
That's how I say it.
It's one of those words I never say out loud. And then every time I do, I'm like, have I ever spoken English before? I guess that's French. LaCroix or a non-alcoholic beer. Just like having a replacement behavior helped me realize that is alcohol something that I really want to be an automatic habit? No, it's not. Something I always want to have a mindful relationship with. And the fact that I can just literally, it was more about having something in my hand than Lionel's rocking one. That I was like, wow, I can just replace this behavior in a way that's really fun and healthy. Hop tea is so good. I am so obsessed with hop tea. It's hoppy. I'm a huge IPA fan. I love bitter, hazy, oh man, I just love IPAs. But alcohol really impairs my ability to sleep. Drew mentioned in the chat, alcohol can really impair your ability to naturally handle and adjust to inflammation, which can definitely impair your ability to recover. We both noticed, and this becomes even more important the further you progress in your athletic career, after long runs or really hard workouts, your body's going to be very sensitive to alcohol, and it can really, really impair your ability to recover. So just, take those things. Does that mean you can never have a beer? Probably not, but we always encourage people investigating their relationship with alcohol and athletics. There's a very strong sober community within Microcosm. And if you're ever curious about that, we can always connect people. I think that's a really cool thing that we have as part of our group.
I would really like to hear from Kylie if she's got any insights.
I don't really have any additional insights. I just work with people on trying to figure out a different healthy habit to kind of replace, like you guys were chatting about. And I think Drew bringing up the inflammation piece is also in the chat there is a good point. So it is going to affect your body's ability to kind of handle that inflammation. So you kind of have to keep that in mind, I would say, when you are drinking alcohol after a run. But yeah, I work with people on, you know, like mocktails, coming up with like mocktail recipes and herbal teas, things like that as good kind of substitutions. Because I think, like you said, Zoe, it's oftentimes it's like that social habit for a lot of people. So if you can find something else that's a good substitution, that it also helps.
Yeah, thanks. I think the is it Athletica?
Athletic.
The NA beers are super good. I know for me, every year as I get fitter, I have less tolerance for alcohol. And I get to the point where if I have like 1 or 2 beers after 8 o'clock at night, my sleep I sleep for 8 hours, but it's not sleep at all.
I
like
get
you
weird
don't
beer
get
sweats.
any REM sleep. No dreaming, none of the good signs that you're getting a nice night of sleep. So that's definitely something that Zoe and I support each other on and talk about all the time, which is like, all right, like after a really long run, yeah, it's nice to like go and have a beer and eat some tater tots. But
what I found is really nice is an afternoon beer and not no beer after like 8 or 9 o'clock at night.
Like we tend to do that in the afternoon so it doesn't impact your sleep. Again, you know, your sleep is absolutely your most important recovery tool. There is no other substitute. Whatever they do in those cryovac freezer things and your foam roller and your Theragun and whatever else it is, throw it all away. Doesn't matter if you're not getting enough sleep. So, you know, enjoying a beer or a beverage, alcoholic beverage, I think is fine, but you'll notice as you get fitter, you're going to be more sensitive to these things. Be mindful of that. Be mindful of your body feedback. You will get dehydrated from drinking a lot of alcohol, especially after race. You heard it. Zoe did the research. Even 1 beer can affect you.
It affects your testosterone production. Man, I wrote down all the things that I was surprised by. It disrupts your glycogen synthesis. It can disrupt your protein synthesis. Yeah, I mean, you want to be synthesizing proteins. You want to have testosterone.
You need that glycogen.
You need that glycogen. Yeah. So, you know, just always keep your relationship to all things mindful. Your relationship to running, your relationship to TV, habit. You know, you just want to engage with your human life intentionally.
Yeah.
Coffee, consume mindfully.
Totally. I was just working with an athlete this week about limiting caffeine intake to 11 a.m. and earlier in the day because their sleep was becoming so affected. Anyways, that's a whole other discussion, but thank you guys. I think instead of trying to sneak in this last question,
actually do it. Can you answer it in less than 30 seconds? I'll do it.
Okay.
Should I be writing my splits on every workout?
No.
Done.
We did it. We got all. Did we do 5 today? Yes, we got 5. 2 weeks in a row. Yeah. Starting 2020 on.
Dropping mad knowledge.
Don't write your splits out. It's not important.
Do we look at your splits? No, we do not.
Actually, I do, but
occasionally, I mean, for some athletes, I'll look on key workouts, but like, do I need to know the splits for everyone's easy run? No, I do not. Do I need to know that? Like, it's too much data. It can cause an unhealthy dependence on the numbers when that's less productive than just like high-fiving yourself.
Yes. All right, guys, thank you.
Question streak.
That's a healthy streak.
Yeah.
Okay, on Monday, we're talking about long race crewing and pacing, drop bags, and all the
everything you need to know about running long races.
Yes. So tune in, and we'd love to get your guys' tips and feedback in that call. So if you guys have things that have worked for you, come prepared to share. It would be really nice to hear from you guys. And I hope everybody has a good weekend.
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.